You know, a religious movement from the 16th century, you'd think it would just be about faith, right? But what if I told you it did way more than that? What if it fundamentally rewired the way we think, kicking off an intellectual revolution that, believe it or not, is still shaping our world today? Let's dive into how a rebellion against the church ended up forging the modern mind. It sounds like the start of a pretty weird riddle, doesn't it? But the answer is actually one of the most important stories of the last 500 years. See, the link between these three things, it's not some coincidence. It's a direct chain reaction, a domino effect that starts with one challenge to religious authority, leads to a completely new understanding of the universe, and lands, believe it or not, at the very idea of you, the modern individual. Okay, so to really get why this was such a massive explosion, we first need to understand what the world was like before the fuse was lit. And honestly, it was a world of certainty, a world governed by one single, incredibly powerful authority. Before the Reformation, if you lived in Europe, your social and intellectual life was almost completely dominated by the Roman Catholic Church. And I don't just mean it was a religious institution. No, it was the institution. It was the place that defined reality itself. And this authority was, well, it was total. The church didn't just tell you how to interpret the Bible, its authority defined the entire worldview. Science, what they called natural philosophy back then, was based on the ancient Greek thinker Aristotle. Not because of experiments or data, but because the church had decided his ideas were official doctrine. And if you deviated from that, whether in theology or in science, that wasn't just an academic debate. It was seen as a challenge to the entire order of the world, and it was shut down, fast. But a structure that rigid, that monolithic, well, it was about to be shaken right to its core. And the catalyst wasn't a king or an army or anything like that. It was a movement of dissent that started with just one person. It all kicks off in 1517. Picture this. A German friar, Martin Luther, walks up to a church door in Wittenberg, and he nails up this list, his 95 theses. On the surface, he was protesting what he saw as corruption, especially the church selling so-called indulgences, which were basically get-out-of-hell-free cards. But his protest was fueled by a much deeper, much more radical idea. Right at the heart of his challenge was this revolutionary principle, sola scriptura. It's Latin for scripture alone. What Luther was arguing was that the ultimate authority wasn't the Pope, it wasn't church traditions, it was the Bible itself. And this was, in effect, a spiritual declaration of independence. It meant that every single person had the right, and really the duty, to read and figure out the scriptures for themselves. It shifted the source of truth from a massive institution to the individual's own conscience. And this is why the Reformation was so much more than just a religious squabble. You know, the word skeptic, in its original Greek, simply means an enquirer, someone who isn't satisfied and is still looking for the truth. By challenging the highest authority in Europe, Luther and the other reformers weren't just complaining. They were engaging in this profound act of skepticism. They weren't happy with the official answers, so they went looking for truth themselves. And right here, this is where that chain reaction really begins. Because once you've questioned the authority that defines God himself, well, every other authority is suddenly fair game. This new way of thinking, this culture of inquiry, it couldn't be kept inside the church walls. It spilled over, and it started to lay the foundation for the next great revolution. So the first major ripple effect from this new skeptical mindset wasn't a revolution on Earth, but up in the heavens. It was a revolution in how we understood the entire universe. And the shift was just dramatic. The old universe, the one the church backed, was based on Aristotle's philosophy. It put the earth at the center because, well, it just felt right. It seemed like common sense. But the new universe, the one guys like Copernicus were proposing, wasn't based on authority or common sense. It was based on math and observation, and it put the sun at the center. Of course, because it went against official doctrine, it was condemned as heresy. But that spirit of inquiry, it was already out of the bottle.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, this connection sounds good, but is it real? Well, the connection between the Reformation and this new science wasn't just philosophical, it was statistical. Seriously, just look at this number, 7 times. What on earth could that refer to?
Well, a major historical analysis looked at Europe's leading scientists from the 17th to the 19th centuries, and they found something absolutely astounding. Protestants were represented over 7 times more than Catholics among this scientific elite. And scholars argue this was no accident. The Reformation had created an environment where asking tough questions and challenging authority wasn't just allowed, it was valued. An atmosphere that turned out to be incredibly fertile ground for scientific discovery. The second major ripple was just as deep. The Reformation didn't just change how people saw the heavens, it completely changed how they saw themselves.
Now, this is a really crucial distinction to make. The movement fostered what we can call individuality, not individualism. This wasn't about a selfish, me-first kind of attitude, not at all. It was about the quest to become a mature, principled person, someone who thinks for themselves, but is also guided by universal values and a sense of responsibility to others. You can almost watch this new ideal of the individual evolve. It kind of started at a physical level, with the idea of the rugged, self-reliant person. Then it grew into a social form, the innovator, the entrepreneur. But its highest expression was mental. The person who had the freedom and, just as importantly, the ability to think for themselves, to challenge the norms, and to come up with brand new ideas. And here's where it all ties back together. That core Protestant idea of a direct line to God, of reading the scripture for yourself. It was a profound validation of a person's inner life, of their mental freedom. It laid the spiritual groundwork for the very concept of the modern self, someone who is responsible for their own beliefs and their own destiny. So, if we bring all these different threads together, you can see this clear line running from a religious rebellion all the way to the world we live in today. It's a totally fair question. Why should we care about theological arguments from half a millennium ago? Well, because the shockwaves from that explosion are still being felt every single day. The Reformation's legacy is, first and foremost, a powerful precedent. It proved that even the largest, most entrenched authorities could be successfully challenged by individuals. It championed the idea that your personal conscience and your own interpretation could win out over rigid dogma. That spirit of inquiry is what fueled the scientific revolution, and it gave us the philosophical building blocks for our modern ideas of freedom and what it means to be an individual. So in the end, the story of the Reformation is really a testament to the world-changing power of asking questions. It all started by challenging one central authority, and in doing that, it gave all of us a new toolkit for inquiry, for discovery, and for defining ourselves. And it leaves us with a pretty powerful question to think about. In our world today, what is the one dominant idea that's just waiting to be questioned?